And so if we're not talking about war, and I hope we don't get into a war, a smart strategy would be to sit down with the Iranians and say, look, there's two paths here, which I think is essentially what President Obama is doing. One path is, we're going to try to help you out of this. So give them an exit door. Give them a way to get out of the problem. What would that be? We could say to the Iranians, look, if you want civil nuclear power to generate electricity, we can build those power plants for you. President Bush said that. President Obama is saying that. And as long as we're not going to give you access to the fuel cycle, because nobody trusts Iran. No one trusts Iran worldwide. And they need to have inspections of their civil nuclear plants by the International Atomic Energy Agency. But if we could say to them, we'll lift the sanctions, at least some of them. We'll help you get civil nuclear power as long as you submit yourself to inspections so we know you're not trying to obtain a nuclear weapon. That might be a fair thing for the United States and Russia and China to offer Iran. But there's another path. If you can't, you say to Iran, if you can't accept that, then you are going to have sanctions put on. And we are going to isolate you. And we are going to make life difficult for you. Why are we doing that? Because the prospect of a nuclear armed Iran is really forbidding. It would be contrary to the interests of all the Arab countries, of Israel and of the U.S. and of Europe. We just can't trust the Ahmadinejad government, which has violated all the UN sanctions, Security Council sanctions resolutions, which has time and again been lying to the UN about what it's doing. You heard President Obama stood up here in New York, 3 weeks ago today. He and Sarkozy and Prime Minister Brown, they revealed publicly that they thought Iran was building a secret nuclear facility, and the Iranians hadn't told anybody about it. And the Iranians quickly said, oh yeah, we'll let people visit it. But they did that because, they were challenged publicly. So it's hard to trust this government on the nuclear weapons issue. I don't know if I answered your question.
But who's supplying the enriched uranium to them?
Well, Iran has uranium. They have uranium.
And they're not getting more from another country?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of suspicion about what they're doing. I'm not in a position to know exactly what they're doing. But the problem is this government the Ahmadinejad government and its predecessor governments have lied to the UN, not just to the US, about what they're doing. So it's hard to trust a government that does that. Again, I think we should be smarter about how we handle it, not through military force, but through a combination of persuasion and sanction. That's where I see Obama going. Yes, sir.
I'm Dan Severson. I'm also a Bard student in my senior year, international relations major.
International relations?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I had a couple questions. First is, you mentioned that the United States needs to lead, but that we also need to cooperate with other countries.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think the United States is the indispensable nation?
Oh, that's a great question.
The second question is, with regard to Afghanistan, it seems like there's a contradiction. During the Bush administration, when we first entered Afghanistan, the strategy was to promote democracy. And as you said, the situation was very somewhat stable. Now the new strategy is simply to defeat Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, or the terrorist threat. Yet the new strategy being implemented for that limited goal is counterinsurgency and
Yes.
more troops and building up civil institutions. So how do we reconcile those two conflicting goals and
Really
strategies?
good questions.
And
We could have a whole course at Bard or Harvard on your two questions.
I have one more, but I don't know, maybe too much. But this summer I was working in the State Department actually.
Oh, you did? As an intern?
Yeah.
Good for you.
The Office of Need Research in the INR, and I was wondering what you think the role for public diplomacy might be going forward, the Obama administration.
We do have a whole course at Harvard on that question. Thanks for your questions. First of all, a great book to read is Fareed Zakaria's book, The Post-American World. It gets to your first question, are we indispensable? Fareed Zakaria is American, born in India. He's the foreign editor of Newsweek. He has a CNN International Affairs program on Sunday called GPS. He's a very smart guy. Read this book. In this book, Fareed he basically says, look, the United States is going to remain the most powerful country in the world. We are, essentially, he says, indispensable in the power that we have, and what we do matters. He says, but other countries are rising, and the post-American world that we're entering is a world where China, India, Brazil, and other countries are important. He says there He says if the United States can maintain its economic growth, he specifically says if we can maintain a lead in nanotechnology and biotechnology, we can have a modern economy that can succeed in the future. But that America is critical, indispensable to resolving problems around the world. Let me illustrate that for you, just based on my own experience. There's a lot of anti-Americanism in the world. We have to live with it. Probably less now, since Obama became president, than when George W. Bush was president, frankly. But I found that whether countries liked us or not, whether we were popular or unpopular, that there was a really big problem they called us. I was State Department spokesman in the mid-90s. There was a big problem between China and Taiwan over the Taiwan Straits. Bill Clinton became the intermediary. The Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Who do the Palestinians and Israelis trust to mediate the conflict? The United States. They're not always happy with us. President Obama's opinion ratings in Israel are very low. And you know, the Palestinians have a beef with the United States and have for a long time. They don't think sometimes that we try hard enough. But we're indispensable, I think, to that process. After the Mumbai attacks, remember last Thanksgiving, the horrible terrorist attacks in Mumbai? At two of the hotels? Condi Rice, the Secretary of State, went to Delhi and Islamabad, essentially to try to make sure that India and Pakistan did not go to war. So Madeleine Albright, when she was Secretary of State, said, the United States is the indispensable country. A lot of people said that sounds arrogant. I thought she was right to say it. It's factually true. I think we are that important in the world, and countries do look for our leadership. On Afghanistan, all I'd say is this. I agree with President Obama in the 2008 campaign. The real threat to the United States is more in Afghanistan than in Iraq, because that's where Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are. And so I think we need to be there. My personal view is that we need to continue fighting that particular war. He has a big decision. Do you now add 30 or 40,000 troops? Do you try to practice counterinsurgency, meaning the troops are there really to protect the civilian populations, and you try to give economic and humanitarian support to the populations. You try to minimize airstrikes, which can obviously end up with civilian casualties. I think it's a smart strategy. We have two brilliant generals, General Petraeus, who's the regional commander, and General McChrystal. These are our best people in our military as strategists on counterinsurgency. And my own personal view is that the president ought to take their advice, and that we ought to stay involved in this very difficult war in Afghanistan. It's not easy to say that because, you know, when we are in a war, we risk our lives of our soldiers. We've lost lots of soldiers, unfortunately, tragically, in Afghanistan. But it's a war that I think we need to win. And we need to protect the Afghan government and help the Pakistani government to fight. So that's my answer on Afghanistan. And on public diplomacy, very important that we present an accurate, true, and picture of our society to the rest of the world, because there's so many myths about the United States and untruths that sometimes are communicated in the foreign press, particularly in dictatorships. And so we need to be very active in telling America's story and sending people around the world to be active as public servants. And that's part of public diplomacy, and I think it's an important thing for our country to do. You asked very complicated questions. I gave you very simplistic answers. So I apologize.
Bases.
Pardon?
Cover the bases.
All right, I tried to.